Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and this one's a little loaded. So, recently, a bunch of Wiz content creators got together and did a roundtable where they discussed their grievances with the game. It involved a bunch of people who got to talking on Twitter after Fairy Queens talked about how the game would be so much better if KI removed raid-style gameplay, Rochambeaus and spellements, bringing back low-level PvP and team PvP, as well as tournaments, and she also mentioned adding new side worlds with new spells and low-level dungeons. And I really can't help but agree. As someone who's quit for years in the past because the developers forcing the players to play how they want us to play, it's becoming a worse issue. And I'll be going over these points as they came up in the roundtable, and I'll give my thoughts on them. So first up, we have this whole idea of quote-unquote Raid 101. And as someone who raids often, I can confirm it's a very complex type thing with a lot of moving parts. For Azteca at least, all 12 people have got to be doing their part. There's typically entire Google Slides presentations involved, like with my guild. It's really this whole thing, and it was not designed to be done by casual players. The devs made it real clear in the past that it's supposed to be that way, but they also said it wouldn't cross over into standard gameplay. Cut to the fall of 2022. Enter Eon of Atavis. This boss, the final one in Novus, was notorious for being a general pain in the ass to do, polymorphing your entire team and making you guess which of the four was the best to attack. You had to have, at least a basic understanding of Rochambeau to progress the fight, which the game never teaches you. You gotta find that out on your own. You had to know how to switch your school pips around, and the mechanic for that came out the same day the boss did. You had to cycle your deck hard to set up gambits you did know how to use. Then you actually had to pull the damn cards, and you had to sit there for 20 minutes doing all that before you killed the boss you're supposed to attack, so you could actually start the fight. It was a very, very frustrating boss that no one liked. The drop rates were terrible and diluted with tons of lower tier gear, and there really wasn't a craftable alternative like there was in Lemuria and prior worlds. Of course, now the general sentiment is that most players would kill to have Atavis back. The Nightmare was severely overhyped. It originally dropped in exclusively challenge mode for well over its first week, and everyone sort of checked it out once, be it on someone's stream or whatever, and had absolutely no inclination to go through that hellscape willingly for 2 damage and some pierce. Because that's really all that you're getting. I would genuinely recommend, if you don't want to deal with it, stick to Eon. I promise it's fine. Plus, I'm pretty sure, with the right stats and whatnot, like the pet and all that, you can still hit the new damage cap, even if you don't have the reader hat and boots. So, just to keep in mind. The overwhelming majority of the community said, alright, we'll just wait for standard mode and get our gear from there. Cut to the Wednesday after release, and standard mode is out. Great. Except it really doesn't feel all that standard at all. The horrific broken dreams that move at the speed of light are still on patrol, regularly catching anyone with higher than 50 ping to the servers and chucking them back to the entrance. You also have to beat the dungeon 25 times at present, but the devs have said that they're going to be reducing that to 15 next week, or this week technically, which I think 15 is still a little steep for a dungeon like this, but 15 is better than 25, so I'll take it. I've gone on about this in another video though, so I'll let that one do the talking for me here. The main point is, this was another example of the devs not adhering to their prior promise about not making standard mode like challenge mode. Even without things like the timer, numerous banned spells, and insane cheats, the Nightmare still felt like a raid with everything else that was going on. And don't even get me started on the fact that the bosses had, damn near double their health that they had in challenge mode. I thought that was a strange design choice, but hey. The boss fights themselves are really the least of the issues though, and there's a bunch of strats out explaining how to do those. But there's no concrete strat that can be made for navigating the maze with, all the wisps of misfortune on steroids rolling around. If any of you watch my raid highlights, you'll know that the wisps are a real problem. And then there's also, finding 12 out of 27 Dreamwater spills, etc. It's also totally not unreasonable to think that standard mode is something that's not worth farming. People at the round table, like Ultimate Speedster for example, was talking about how he's not even going to bother farming Nightmare, and if the fall dungeon is in any way similar to this, he's just going to wait till the next world to get new gear, which again, is like, what, 20 months from now? Like November 2025 is when they're going to be doing that. And others shared the sentiment, saying that they were totally fine with going from 160's Eon gear straight to the level 180 set if the fall dungeon doesn't deliver. Some even said they would stop playing the game due to the precedent something like that would set, because the game wouldn't be casual anymore. The impression that many have gotten from the nightmare is that Wiz is becoming anti-casual, and you can tell the devs are really trying to push people to do challenge mode because the drop rates in standard are unfathomably trash. Like, it's not even this bad in the other standard modes. Like Freddy standard will drop you your ring, Crash will drop you amulets, like at a reasonable rate. But this, I mean, I think in my 25 runs that I did on my myth just to get the badge, and so I could never touch this again, I got maybe around 7 to 8 Reaver pieces. The rest were Warper. So there's all this anti-casual stuff going on. People just want to play casually and not be super hardcore about it, and they're open to saying as much. And even still, you see people like this in Speedy's chat and elsewhere calling people bad at the game for not wanting to put up with all the problems they have with the dungeon. It comes off as extremely elitist, and if a guy named Wolf Stormblade is calling you out over it, you need to think about your position on it and why the overwhelming majority of people play the game to begin with. Wiz is supposed to be a chill game, a massive multiplayer online where you actively collaborate with your fellow wizards, and if the individual experience is so bad to where notable content creators don't even want to run a dungeon with a good team, that is a real issue the devs need to address. Like, not everyone has a guild full of people who've run it 50 times and know every little thing about the strat at their disposal, and even some of the people that do don't think it's worth the trouble. They also touched on this whole Rochambeau Wiz type thing, and how there's been talk that Rochambeau is what killed WizPeeve, and to me, as a longtime player, what really killed PvP in this game was the devs' refusal to listen to the community. It goes back to what I said at the start of the video, where they were forcing us to play the way they wanted us to play, and if we tried to speak out against it, they'd ignore us and pass it off as quote-unquote negativity or talk down to us. Think of the whole garbage take incident from a couple years ago. Well, this problem has only gotten worse after I quit, and it's so bad now when I'm back. The tipping point to me was the Caramel update in fall 2020. This was the first time the devs intervened and completely upturned the meta by removing pre-enchanted cards, citing them to be too powerful, in quotes, because we could draw them at will from side and because they, quote-unquote, created a barrier to entry. They first announced this, I think, 5 days before test hit live that year, and no amount of trying to convince them not to do it was going to stand in their way. I mean, I said in my video from back then, where I talked about the proposed change, that I would quit the game if they followed through, and sure enough, 5 days later, the changes hit live, you know, unchanged, like from their original form. And, you know, Solar Surge meta was a whole thing. And anyway, I quit for 3 years because of that. Because of this, I was not present for the slew of horrific changes that occurred over the following 3 years, but the arena I came back to in October was dilapidated and had far fewer players than when I'd left, so the changes' effect certainly did not have the devs' intended effect on the PvP community. Chief among these changes appears to be the introduction of Rochambeau spells introduced in the Lemuria updates, and it struck me as odd that they would add a rock, paper, scissors type system to a game like Wiz. Notable content creator Blake PvP, who I used to watch all the time, I was one of his first fans way back when, and he actually quit because of this update. Because, you know, it's nowhere near as enjoyable as it used to be, and part of why I enjoy Death PvP so much right now is because I can play like I used to, you know? I can cycle utility for main, think like, you know, ghouls, shields, counters, and hits from side. The whole idea of Rochambeau spells and the Arc 1 spell elements acting as a bolster to the concept have made PvP far less enjoyable. Most of what PvP is now is, you know, setting up gambits, trying to get an open shot when the opponent deck fails, which really just adds this massive RNG element to the game. And that alone really strips PvP of most of the fun. Sometimes you'll find yourself having to play He Don't Got It and just sending a hit of some kind and praying the opponent doesn't have the cheat counter that outvalues your hits. Like, the fire school is a lot like this right now. If you send in overtime, it is so easy for the opponents to just crack in it and like remove all that damage that you tried to set up and give themselves blades in the process, because Roshan wins. There's really not much fun to be had in PvP these days. I only really do it for content. That's most of why PvP is dead. And I wouldn't say Rochambeau in and of itself killed PvP. It was already on a steep decline because the developers refused to make the game fun. Rochambeau was just the point of no return, and I've seen developers and their writers alike say that Rochambeau makes the game more balanced, but what good is balancing the game when it stops being fun? Not to mention, there was a way to have a meta that's balanced and fun, but the devs refused to bite or listen to us when we, give them suggestions on how to get there, and the community is steadily losing hope that PvP will ever be fun again. People at the roundtable talked about how there should be a classic mode in some capacity, and if the queue wasn't, dead to the point where a split like this would full kill it, I would wholeheartedly support it. I've also talked at length about tournaments before on this channel, and how they really need to come back. And, people at the roundtable also talked about these. Fairy Queens, she used to do tournaments a lot. She's a big content creator now, and she loved them because they were a low barrier to entry, low risk form of PvP. And I think it was Artie, he told me before that they just had tournament rewards on the back burner for a while, and if the devs know it's good for them, they'll move those to the front burner so they can successfully relaunch tournaments. Those were a source of a lot of fun in my Wiz career back then, and I see no reason not to bring them back in 2024. Spell elements were also implemented poorly, requiring so much to get to tier 5 is honestly really not great. I think it's a total of 685, so it's like you kind of just sit there spamming a spell at Vasagash Weaver for days on end, but that's a pretty cold take, and everybody's talked about it before, as they have with all of the points I would make in this section. I'll probably talk about the Arc 1 spell elements and the Arc 2 spell elements that are coming in the spring update at some point, probably this week, so subscribe and stay tuned. Fairy Queens did also mention side worlds. I think it'd really be great if they dropped a new one for really any level band. New spells coming from them would be cool too, and I'd be down to see that, maybe a Wisteria Part 2 at level 75. Part 3 at 125. Who knows? They could just do the Spiral Cup tournament every 50 levels. I'd be down for that. Also in here was the PvP barrier to entry, and I really need to make a follow-up to my first video on this topic, because in the months since that video, it's just gotten so much higher. I have 3 out of my 7 characters ready to do PvP on at the moment, being my Ice, my Death, and my Balance. And keep in mind, my Balance is level 100, and the gear there does not change, so I'm left with 2 schools to do max level PvP on. And max speed is sort of the endgame content that KI wants to push, along with, challenge mode and raids. And for all the raiding I do, I only have 2 characters fully set up and ready to go. The meta setup at the moment is a hat that'll get you to max pips or accuracy, which is typically Stalker, Skyfarer, or Wastelander, the Hunhao 170 robe, the Xibalba or Hunhao boots, depending on if you need pip chance or not, and the Xibalba or Hunhao wand, depending on if you need pip conversion or not, all of which give Shadow Pip rating. I've already talked about the Nightmare, so that's the hat locked behind a bad time. The other hat options come from packs, so that's the other options locked behind money. And then the others, like the robe, boots, and wand, are then locked behind the Crying Sky raid, so those are locked behind a bad time and money as well. Many of my guildmates have just, thrown 80,000 crowns at the chest after a win to get all the Xibalba shards they need to upgrade the gear, which, by the way, costs 17 shards for the clothes and 15 for the wands. So for the clothes, that is because you get 7 to 8 shards per run, so you need to win 3 times or 3 hits of the chest in order to be able to craft like a robe, which is insane to me. If you don't do that, good luck queuing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I'll get into more on this later this week, so stay tuned for that. And it's just insane how one of the main reasons why the devs suddenly turned interventionist back in 2020 is now the #1 biggest thing keeping people away from doing PvP. They touched on this in the roundtable, the content creators did, and I think it deserves its own video from a number of creators, not just me. So if you're a PvP creator out there hearing this, well, there's a video idea. The first one I made back in early October was the one that blew up my channel, so I mean, I'd say full send to any budding creator who wants to talk about this, because it gets people engaged and it gets them talking. And if enough people talk, who knows? The devs might finally pull their heads out of their asses and listen to us. Or, at least they'll stop blocking prominent creators who they keep antagonizing. It's worth a shot anyway. But those are just my takes. There's a lot that these content creators talked about in their little roundtable. I was not a part of it because it was just for the people who interacted a bunch on Twitter, and I didn't interact a bunch on Twitter. But it's well worth talking about these topics just individually, and this whole roundtable I think has made my whole week. So I will be talking more about these topics as the week goes on. So if you're new, subscribe and stay tuned. So yeah, I'll have some more content on these topics for you this week. So thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more. We're over 100 members, well over it. And yeah, I guess I will see y'all